Most people wait years for their life to change, not realizing that change often begins the moment they decide to interrupt their routine, not when everything is perfect, not when motivation suddenly appears, but when something inside finally says, "I can't keep living on autopilot." This is the moment where small choices begin to matter more than big intentions, and where a few days of awareness can quietly reshape everything. Most people believe real change takes months or years, and that belief alone keeps them stuck far longer than necessary. But there comes a moment, often quiet, often unexpected, when you realize that life doesn't change because time passes, it changes because decisions do. The idea that transformation must be slow is comforting, but it isn't always true. Sometimes all it takes is a few deliberate shifts, practiced with intention, to interrupt years of autopilot living. This is the moment when you stop waiting for motivation and start responding to clarity. The truth is, your life is shaped less by big events and more by small, repeated behaviors you barely notice. Habits decide how you wake up, how you think, how you react, and how you end your days. When those habits change, even slightly, the direction of your life changes with them. 6 days may sound insignificant, but 6 days of intentional behavior can break patterns that have been quietly running your life for years. Change begins when awareness replaces routine. You start to see how often you move through your days unconsciously, reacting instead of choosing, scrolling instead of resting, worrying instead of focusing. These habits don't feel destructive in the moment, but over time, they drain energy, clarity, and confidence. The first step toward change is not discipline. It's noticing what you do automatically and questioning whether it still serves who you want to become. What makes short-term habit shifts powerful is momentum. When you commit to small, manageable actions for a defined period, like 6 days, you remove the pressure of forever. The brain responds better to clarity than to overwhelm. Instead of asking yourself to change your entire life, you ask yourself to show up differently today, then tomorrow, and then the next day. This approach builds trust with yourself, and trust is the foundation of lasting change. These habits are not extreme. They don't require perfection, special tools, or a complete lifestyle overhaul. They require presence, they require honesty, and most importantly, they require consistency over intensity. Each habit works not because it's impressive, but because it interrupts patterns that quietly control your thoughts, emotions, and energy. The next 6 days are not about becoming someone new. They're about returning to the version of yourself that already knows what matters. If you commit to these habits, not perfectly, but sincerely, you'll notice something shift long before day 6 ends. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you become more intentional. And once that happens, going back to autopilot no longer feels natural. The first habit that began changing my life didn't look dramatic from the outside, but it altered everything internally. It was the decision to stop starting my day in reaction mode. No phone, no rushing, no immediate intake of noise, problems, or other people's priorities. I realized that the way I entered my mornings was quietly programming how I thought, felt, and responded for the rest of the day. Before this habit, my mornings felt rushed, even when there was no real urgency. My mind would wake up already tense, already thinking about what needed to be fixed or caught up on. This constant low-grade stress felt normal until I interrupted it. I began giving myself the first few minutes of the day without input, and the difference was immediate. My nervous system stopped waking up in defense mode. This habit wasn't about productivity, it was about ownership. I stopped letting the outside world claim my attention before I had even checked in with myself. Instead of scrolling or reacting, I sat with stillness. Sometimes that meant silence, sometimes a deep breath, sometimes a single intention for the day. What mattered was that I was choosing my starting point instead of surrendering it. What surprised me most was how quickly my thoughts slowed down. Without the instant flood of information, my mind felt clearer. Decisions felt simpler. I wasn't immediately pulled into comparison or urgency. This small shift created space, and in that space I noticed how much mental energy I had been wasting every morning without realizing it. Starting the day intentionally changed how I handled everything that followed. Conversations felt less reactive. Problems felt more manageable. Even setbacks didn't shake me the way they used to. This habit didn't remove challenges, but it changed my posture toward them. I wasn't chasing the day anymore. I was meeting it from a grounded place. By the second or third day, this habit stopped feeling like effort and started feeling like protection. It reminded me that my time, attention, and energy are valuable, and that how I begin my day is a choice, not an accident. This single change didn't just affect my mornings, it quietly reshaped my entire rhythm. The second habit that changed my life wasn't something anyone else could see. There was no external sign, no visible routine, but internally, it shifted everything. I became aware of the voice I was living with all day, the commentary running in the background of my thoughts. I realized that much of my exhaustion did not come from what I was doing, but from how I was speaking to myself while doing it. I noticed how often my inner dialogue was critical, impatient, or dismissive. I spoke to myself in ways I would never speak to someone I cared about. Small mistakes became evidence of failure. Delays became personal flaws. This habit had been shaping my confidence quietly, day after day, without me questioning it. Instead of trying to force positivity, I focused on neutrality. I didn't tell myself everything was great. I simply stopped attacking myself for being human. When something went wrong, I replaced harsh judgments with honest observations. This alone reduced tension I didn't realize I was carrying. This shift created emotional space. I stopped wasting energy on self-blame and redirected it toward solutions. My thoughts became more constructive. I could correct behavior without tearing myself down. Over time, this habit made challenges feel less personal and progress feel more possible. By the fourth or fifth day, I noticed my confidence stabilizing, not increasing dramatically, but steadying. I trusted myself more because I wasn't constantly undermining my own efforts. The relationship I had with myself became safer, and from that safety, clarity emerged. Changing how I talked to myself didn't make life perfect, but it made it manageable. It gave me emotional room to breathe, learn, and adjust without collapsing. This habit taught me that self-respect isn't boiled through harshness. It's built through honesty, patience, and consistency. The third habit that began changing my life was learning to protect my time without guilt. I realized that my energy was being drained not by big responsibilities, but by constant distractions. Messages I felt obligated to answer immediately, tasks I said yes to automatically, and habits that scattered my attention. I wasn't overwhelmed because life was too demanding. I was overwhelmed because everything had access to me at once. I began noticing how often I switched focus throughout the day. One task would lead to a notification, which led to another thought, which led to another distraction. This constant fragmentation left me feeling busy but unfulfilled. When I committed to single tasking, even briefly, my mind felt calmer almost instantly. This habit didn't require strict schedules or productivity systems. It required intention. I started setting simple boundaries around my attention. I put my phone away during focused moments. I allowed messages to wait. I stopped treating every interruption as urgent. This created mental space I hadn't felt in a long time. Protecting my time also meant becoming honest about what deserved it. Not every request required my energy, not every opportunity aligned with my priorities. Saying no became less about rejection and more about clarity. I realized that every yes carried a cost, and calm required discernment. Within days, I noticed my focus strengthening. I completed tasks with less resistance. I felt more present in conversations. Even rest felt deeper because my mind wasn't scattered. This habit didn't make me rigid, it made me intentional. By protecting my time and attention, I stopped feeling pulled in every direction. My days felt more grounded, more complete. This habit reminded me that focus is not about doing more, it's about doing what matters with full presence. And that alone began to change how I experienced each day. The fourth habit that changed my life in a matter of days was learning to pause instead of react. I had always believed that my emotions controlled me, that stress, frustration, or disappointment simply happened and I had to ride them out. But once I began paying attention, I realized how quickly I reacted without giving myself a moment to breathe. That instant reaction was costing me clarity, energy, and peace. I started practicing a simple pause. When something triggered me, an unexpected message, a delay, a difficult conversation, I didn't respond immediately. I gave myself a few seconds to breathe, to feel, to notice what was happening in my body. This pause didn't suppress emotion, it created space around it. And in that space, I regained choice. What surprised me was how often emotions softened on their own when I didn't feed them with stories. Stress lost its grip when I stopped interpreting everything as urgent. Frustration faded faster when I didn't attach it to blame. This habit taught me that emotions are temporary signals, not commands that must be obeyed instantly. As the days passed, my nervous system began to settle. I felt less on edge, less defensive, less reactive. Situations that once drained me no longer had the same power. I wasn't calmer because life was easier. I was calmer because I was responding with awareness instead of impulse. This habit also changed how I treated myself emotionally. When I felt overwhelmed, I stopped criticizing myself for it. I acknowledged the feeling and allowed it to pass without judgment. This self-compassion reduced emotional buildup and made recovery quicker. Calm became something I could return to instead of chase. By regulating my emotions instead of reacting to them, I reclaimed my inner balance. I realized that calm isn't about avoiding feelings, it's about meeting them with steadiness. This habit gave me confidence in my ability to handle stress without being consumed by it, and that confidence changed everything. The fifth habit that completed the change was learning how to end my day instead of collapsing into it. I realized that no matter how intentional my mornings were, how mindful my thoughts became, or how steady my emotions felt, the way I closed each day mattered just as much. Without closure, stress carried over. Without reflection, lessons were lost. Ending the day intentionally gave my mind permission to rest. This habit wasn't about long routines or rigid rules. It was about acknowledgement. Before sleep, I paused and asked myself simple questions. What drained me today? What supported me? What did I handle better than before? These moments of reflection brought clarity and release. Instead of replaying the day unconsciously, I processed it consciously. I also began letting go of the urge to fix everything before resting. Some things didn't need solutions that night. Some thoughts didn't need answers. I practiced trusting that rest itself was productive, that my mind didn't need to stay alert to be responsible. This shift alone reduced the tension I used to carry into sleep. By the sixth day, I noticed how differently my body responded to rest. Sleep felt deeper, mornings felt lighter. I wasn't waking up already behind. Ending the day with intention created a clean, emotional reset, allowing each day to stand on its own rather than blending into exhaustion. What tied all 5 habits together was not discipline, but self-respect. I wasn't forcing change. I was creating conditions where calm, focus, and clarity could exist naturally. These habits didn't overhaul my life in 6 days. They changed my relationship with it, and that shift was enough to alter everything that followed. 6 days didn't make me perfect. They made me present. They showed me that meaningful change doesn't require extremes. It requires consistency, awareness, and intention. These habits became anchors, not rules. And once I experienced life with more calm, clarity, and steadiness, returning to autopilot no longer felt like an option. The change didn't end on day 6. It began there,